Hello everyone. I cannot really see anyone here, so I guess I'm on stage, kind of. And first of all, I'm sorry because I don't have my video on, just because of the internet is super slow, and I don't want anyone to see me frozen in the middle of the talk. Anyway, so let's talk about component testing with Vitest, shall we? But first, as usual, I'm going to tell you a story, a very story in a far, far away land called Twitter. And one day, there was a developer who are probably very tired of reading code base that doesn't have any test and full of bugs. So he make a tweet about test. It contained 4 lines. It say test, 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 seriously test. And I can really feel the frustration here. But the question is, why? Why testing is really important, and why do you ever write unit test? And so I make a poll on Twitter, Land again, and asking anyone, why do you write unit test? Well, I got a bunch of answer, and apparently everyone say it's because it's important, but no one tell me why exactly. And the second most popular answer is because everyone says so. Oh, well, that's a very good answer, by the way, because everyone else says so, I say so. So, you have to go and write unit test. But again, why? Why everyone say unit test is important? Well, one person answered me in a very long explanations. I really appreciate it, and it's really good. Like it really contain all the information why you need to write unit test and why you need to do testing in general. But it can sum up in one word, and 2 words. It will give you code confidence. Well, if you don't write test for your code, you are kind of leaving it out there on the wild and hope that it works. Well, majority of the case, it won't. So writing test is the way that you actually check your test, whether it works, and give you confidence. And testing is not just about unit testing. It's actually a whole pyramid of testing. We start from unit test at the bottom, which is the base of everything, because here you test your logic independently. And if your logic works, then you can move on to integration testing. And integration testing meaning you actually combine all the different logics together or different components together and see whether the data flow and the connections works. You can assume that the function A, logic A works, for logic B works, but together may not work like you want it to be. So that's why we have integration test. And the top of the pyramid is end-to-end test, which this is the only place where you would start to do simulating about user step-by-step experience, and maybe you'll find something weird about UX experience that the user that you didn't think of, or you won't be able to test in unit test and integration test. And with this, you will have on your code base covered and safe. However, I have a disclaimer to make. Well, I hate test. And anyone here hate it like me? Well, and if so, why do you hate test? Well, I have a lot of reason for that. I mean, I wrote tests, I write tests, I will write tests if in any new code base or anything I develop, but I still don't like it, mainly because, well, whenever you look at a complex code base, you will start to feel discouraged because then you will have to write tests. If the code base doesn't have any tests, then writing tests for that code base will be a disaster. Try to understand every function or how it works, especially spaghetti code. No, that's a big no-no. Choosing a testing framework and start to learn it will be a bit problematic. The learning curve is not easy. Let's say, well, if I switch between Cypress to Playwright, or I don't know, from Jest to a different testing framework like Vitest. It can be a bit of learning curve because I will have to learn how to migrate it and new syntax if there is any. Coverage. Oh yeah, this one I hate the most because at work we have like 90% of coverage for the code base. So regardless what you roll, you have to make sure that you have 90% coverage for your code base. And sometimes it's just silly because it's like how I'm going to reach to 90% when I want to push my features to master already, and the only thing stop me from pushing it is 89% of coverage. That's very, very, very confusing. And lastly, you don't have time. Your time is always problematic, especially when you start developing features and the deadline for it to release is tomorrow, and you're like, okay, no, I need to write tests. I haven't had any test coverage here, and that keep a lot of pressure on him. But we're not talking about dilemma. We're not mopping over it. We're here to talk how we're going to overcome this dilemma. Well, there's only one thing to do. You need to plan ahead and try to make writing tests simpler. So how do we plan our test? Well, there's a couple of things that we can do, especially when you're writing components. First of all, you should start with unit testing, and that's what we're talking about unit testing today. The second thing is you have to prioritize what we have to know what framework to choose and prioritize it, which is whether you care about the speed of the test run or whether you have a lot of tests that run in parallel. And of course, nowadays, most of the testing framework will do parallel testing because that's essential. But each of them will have a different speed, and it can be very frustrating if you develop features and you're waiting for the watch mode of a tested of a state runner to run, and it takes forever to finish it. Well, I got it with Jest several times. So so this is one of the things that need to plan ahead. Keep the test in order. You have to test one from the bottom up. Don't skip anything in the middle, and that's how you can make sure that you don't miss anything and everything is planned correctly. And finally, no one have time for manual testing. So we always have to automate our workflow by pipeline, either by like GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps, or whatever that works for you to make your workflow automated and make your test run automated. And of course, manual testing is still an option, but still, the less manual testing you have to do, the better chance that you will have time for other things. And of course, if you write your unit test, your other tests correctly and don't make any dummy test, then your code base is secure and safe, even without manual testing. And finally, you need to plan what your dev environment, like Vite. Don't try to do Webpack, maybe. And the next thing after you plan ahead, you're going to write to make sure that your test, how you're going to write a simple test. Well, in this talk, we're not going to talk about what the methodologies, how we're going to write the test, but we're going to talk about how we're going to write the test with Vitest. And what is Vitest? I assume that everyone here already know more or less about what is Vitest. And if you don't, maybe you should sign up a course in Vue School and start studying it. Take a look in the Vitest website. It's a very easy framework and it's very fast unit test framework powered Vite. So if you're using Vite as your bundle management for your project, then you should use Vitest to test your components. And the second thing is have a very fast watch mode. I tried. I can guarantee for this, and I use both for React and Vue, so I can tell you that it's fast. We have out of the box JS and TypeScript. You don't have to do much configuration here. I have parallel testing support, and the last small fun, but it's a very important thing to know here that all the syntax are really similar to Jest, like 90% similarly. And of course, better performance because faster. And so when you have to move from Jest to Vitest, you will not have to do a lot of migration work. And actually, it would be you can keep like 90% of the code the same. It should change the configuration for the Vite.config file, and everything will work. Okay, so how are we going to use Vitest? Well, first of all, you need to install Vitest either by installing it when you create a new Vue project, or you can add Vitest dependency using yarn npm. And in the Vite config, the JS, you can add the test object where you declare that you can use on the methods from Vitest package global, so you don't have to import it again anyway. And you can also set the environment for the DOM mountain as JS DOM, and that how you can test it. You just need to do that, and then most likely you won't have to change a lot in your if you have a JS code base. And also here you can set the JS DOM at your environment, or you can also set the happy DOM, which I never tried, but I heard that it's very good. So if you want, you can check it out. And or you can also go to the script and manually write a new script command, say test, and add the environment here and add the root here if you don't want to make it in the config file. And either way is good. And how I'm going to test component with Vitest? Well, you need the help of Vue test utils for all this component mountain event and so on. Without this, you won't be able to test component. You can test the logic, but at some point you still need the test util from Vue package. So, and then you can just import the mount from the Vue test util. It's the same thing like we used with testing library before. And just mount the component, and then the whole syntax is remain the same. You should expect the wrapper text contain something, nothing strange here, nothing you need to crack your head over to learn it. And yes, we are talking about how to use it, but we don't have any demo, we don't see any code, we cannot understand how awesome it is. So in this demo, I'm not going to do coding. I'm sorry, the internet doesn't let me. So in this demo, I'm going to show you how we're going to test a component that display movie that have a search box that can filter out movie. And this is how the component look like in the template. So we have an input, and we have a list that display a filter movie by the search term. And of course, you can write the whole logic inside this component, from keeping the search term, from filtering the movies, or so on. So basically, there's 3 functionality you need to perform here. Number 1, fetch movie before mounting the components from an API. The second is allow search by title. And finally, you display the filter list of movie by the search term. And additionally, you probably will need a loading state when you fetch in the movie, and an error state when the fetch failed. So this is the component. You're probably thinking to yourself, okay, I'm going to write a script here. In the script section, I'm going to write the whole logic here, right? That's also possible, but we don't do that, because that means you put all the egg in one basket and you have to test all of them together, and that can cause trouble. If you accidentally break one egg on the way, you never know. So instead of writing everything, we're going to use composable, which we're going to write 2 composable or hooks whatsoever. One is use movies, and the second one is use search. Use movie will fetch the movie according to an API and return movies. And use search will take a list of items and an additional list of filter and return to you the search term in the reactive search term, and the filter list of items based on this search term in the list of movie, and the list of filter you pass to the hook. Okay, and so which means we're going to test 3 things here. We're going to test the component logic separately, which is the use search and use movie. And the second thing, finally, after we test these 2, we only need to do a sanity test of component rendering, and we're going to mock this logic. So we don't have to keep all the tests in one component. testing case. Okay. So how are we going to test the logic? For usage, this is the implementation of usage. And in here, you can see that the main thing for us to test here is to test the filtering of items. And then we test the search of the item that match the search term. And finally, you also have an export a method here that change search term, which meant for to change the search term that you can also test. So how does it look in using Vitest? So we have a describe, and here I'm going to have two tests. The number one is to return a default value of search term, because as you see, the search term is empty first, and the original item is the items that were passed to the composable. And the second test is to change the search term and make sure that the search term is changed and the filter item is changed accordingly. And that's it. This we already have usage covered with these two tests. Simple, right? And the next one, the next case is a little bit more complicated when we have to do the test with use movie, because here we have two things, actually three things. Number one, we have to make the fetch. This is asynchronous call to an API. And then you have to call this call in on before mount, which means you need to mount the component when you want to test this hook, this composable. And the on before mount is synchronous. So you won't be able to know which next tick that this fetch will finish, and you will have the result. For that, we're going to do this thing. One, we're going to mock the global fetch using vi.fn, which vi is the instance of Vitest that you can import from Vitest package. And then you have to mock the return value of fetch after you mock the global fetch. And then you flush on the asynchronous call using flush promise method from Vitest util. Please make sure that all the promise as finished, and then you can get the result. And then you mount the test app. You have to create this testing app with create app from Vue package. And then trigger the use movie composable inside the setup of the test app. And then return and assert whatever result from getting from the mountain. So you can test whether you get the right movie in other state. And finally, before you finish with your test, you need to make sure that you unmount the testing application that were created with create app. Unclear? Okay, and this is how we're going to write it. First, we're going to we're going to mock the global fetch. That is very straightforward. Global.fetch equal vi.fn. Reason why I don't write a Windows or write a Spy-on, because it's not always works like that. So here I'm going to, you can also use additional testing library, additional library for mocking the fetch. But in here, for the sake of it, we're just using the normal fetch. And then I create a function that will just mock the return value for fetch. And before I start on the test, I will make sure that the fetch will have the mock value. And here I passed the result that I designed according to the format of the API that I know it will return to me if I'm calling the hook. Okay. And number three, now I'm going to write the functions that will be reused to mount the testing app that have set up hook. And this one you can reuse it in the other test. Either you can export from this file, or you can create a util file for any testing mockup here. And in the test, should fetch movie, I'll just call with setup and pass hook, so it would composable, and it will, and I get the result here. And then I wait for the flushing on the promise on that synchronous call. And finally, I can assert the result and unmount it. And that's it. 52 lines of code. And you have your test of the composable cover. Okay. And lastly, once after you have the two test test suite for use search and use movies. You only need to perform a very sanity test for the movie components, mostly for the UI to make sure that it's render what it's supposed to render. So here, you don't have to perform everything from start. You can mock the use movie result using composition API and using vit.spyon. You can mock the use search result with the same approach. And then you probably need two tests. Number one test is check on the rendering accordingly, like the header is rendered correctly, the search render, the the list of movie is rendered according to the movies you return. And the second test, you don't mock the use search anymore because you want to, or you can also mock the research and check if the value of the user changed, but most likely because you already covered, so you don't have to check that. What you check here is that interactions with the UI for the search term, it works, and on the data flow from the search term to the component logics, it works as expected. And that's it. This is the sanity test. And if you want to add more feature testing, for example, if you want to add is loading screen or is error screen when the fetch fail, then you just need to add the related test to the movie component because this is changed on the UI. And the second thing, you probably add test for the loading and rejected promise in the hook, in the composable for use movie, but you leave use search as is. That's the only change in two places. And whenever you need to change something else, if it's only UI, you only test on the movie component. It's very isolated. And that's why we splitting the test by logic, because now we have the bottom-up coverage, we have the use search, we have the use movie tested correctly, and we can reuse this in other components, knowing that this composable tested. And you can leave the component testing to be purely about UI interactions, UI integration with the logic, and also accessibility. You don't have to put everything in one place, make it harder for other people to understand what is going on. Let's go better readability. Okay. And finally, if you want to do coverage, well, we know we want to see coverage because sometimes we want to make sure that we reach to that 90% of coverage requirement here. Well, for Vitest, you can add an additional dependency called Vitest coverage Istanbul, and just add in the vit.config.js a section called coverage and add the provider at Istanbul. And then in package.json, you add the script command Vitest, script command coverage and add Vitest run coverage. And that's it. When you run it, you will get on the coverage and you know which line that you're supposed to cover. And here, yes, you can see in the screenshot, I have some work to do here because I have only 50% coverage, and some like I don't even have anything cover. And yep, I got to go and write some tests. And before we finish, if you want to use Vitest in VS Code, we have several extensions, and probably they have an extension for Vitest where you can install it and it will allow you to run the test server, and it's also allow you to toggle the watch mode using the UI, the GUI of the VS Code. It's just nicer for anyone who doesn't want to use the terminal. And what's next? Well, like I always say, plan your test first, code later. You need to plan what you want to test, what logic you want to have, what is the common logic that you want. You probably will use it in another component, and do the test according to those. And you test them as standalone. Don't try to test the composable together in the same component test suite. It's not recommended. It just make your, and you should start going and splitting the components logic. If you are not using composition API, try to use it. I like it. It helped me split my logic into small composable, and then I can decide what I want to do with later on. And lastly, mock responsibly. Responsible both mock responsibly. Yep, you need to mock your test, your logic responsibly. It's easy to make a unit test pass. It's harder to write it with awareness that you need to make sure, you need to try to make it fail and see how your test works. And lastly, if you haven't done it, we have a talk today about accessibility testing, manual testing. Well, we have also automate the accessibility testing, which you can include in your unit test and check on the area or on the focus, the basic navigations using Xcore. And this is how you can have the accessibility testing started without feeling like, what is accessibility again? I'm so tired to hear about that term. Anyway, that's it. And before we finish, just a bit about myself. I'm Maya, and I'm a senior software engineer at Microsoft, and I'm also a book author. I'm a GDE expert and a media developer expert. And that's it. You can follow me on Twitter at Maya Shavin. And thank you for joining my talk today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maya. There are so many questions that are coming through. So,
oh, God.
First off is always going to be, what OS are you using?
Oh, why? are you asking the question because
it looks like you're breaking up again. I'm guessing you're using Windows, okay, but you're breaking up a bit. So I'm guessing it's
No, I'm sorry. I have to turn off the Wi-Fi. I have to turn off the camera. Actually, I'm using Mac OS right now. And I use both. I have a Windows work laptop and I have a Mac laptop. Please don't ask me which one I prefer because it will be hard for me to answer.
I won't. Now, a couple questions from the audience. How easy it is just to Vitest migration?
I think I did the migrations before. I didn't do it for a Vue project. I did for actually I did it for React projects at my work, and it was pretty smooth, to be honest. It's like back then I didn't know that I can define the global scope, so I don't have to describe. I don't have to import the describe, expect, and it. So I literally, the only thing I need to do is move everything that I need to add in every file, the import of the describe, it, expect, and so on. But that is it's not a problem. And then I change on the chess.spy on to v.spy on, then it's also pretty smooth. I would say 90% will be easy.
Okay.
It's really straightforward. The syntax is pretty straightforward. Yeah.
All right. Next question. If if someone has a bunch of framework agnostic util functions in their Vue project, would Vitest also be handy for those using Jest at the moment for their company's Vue app?
I think so. Again, it depends on what kind of well, it depends on what are you writing using, like what are you okay. If you are writing, if your Vue app or if your functions, I'm losing anyone here?
I can still hear you. You're breaking out. Yeah, at the moment, but keep going.
Okay, so I'm saying that it really depends. If you are using Webpack, then I cannot really say that will be handy or not. But in general, if it's util function, you can use Vitest, and it is pretty handy for those. Though I'm not familiar with Jest ATM, so I'm sorry, I cannot comment on that. Maybe someone in the chat will know how to help in this case.
Yeah, definitely. And we can follow up with that one. Let me see. What are some of the best practices you have for using Vitest to test Vue components?
Um, well, I like to when I do the V test to test Vue component, I try to, like I said before in my talk, I try to split the logic completely into a different files and just to complete the component as mostly a template and the minimal logic inside the components. And so when I test something, I don't have to use Vue test util so much in my test. And without that, I can just use Vitest at the normal testing, unit testing frameworks and so on. And I use a lot Spion for Vitest to mock, also for .fm to mock functions and to test if a function is triggered or if or mocking some data for my unit test.
All right. And next one up is how can we ensure that our components tests are comprehensive and cover all possible scenarios?
Uh, okay, that is actually, you probably need to understand what you're writing. And most of the testing case are about, well, you have to test how many if and else you have over there. That's first conditional scenarios. And the second thing is, well, if you have some fetching data, you probably need to make sure that your data is you're fetching. You have to test the data, testing in the case whether you cannot load the data, whether something go wrong in the middle. But my only approach to this is to read the code and write down what can possibly go wrong, and or at the coverage, you look at the coverage case and see which line that none of the tests pass through it. Like you haven't covered that line and see if that line is something trivial or something that may cause a aha moment for testing. And yep, and then ask the test, and that way you can cover most of the case. I wouldn't say that all the case, but most of the case.
Well, lovely. Thank you, Maya, and for coming on and presenting at Vue Nation this year. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. And as a quick last question, will you be tweeting out or sharing like your deck or the code, the sample code that you used?
Yep.
Perfect. Well,
I'm breaking up.
all right. Well, thank you again, Maya. Appreciate it.